The federal Conservative Party leadership is coming up June 27th. The top three contenders so far, Peter MacKay, Marilyn Gladu, and Erin O'Toole. Now, Mr. O'Toole launched his campaign in Calgary recently. To talk more about it is our political reporter and Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, Erin O'Toole is casting himself as the true blue candidate. He wanted to launch in the heart of the Conservative movement in my hometown of Calgary, and apparently his French is a little better than Peter MacKay's.
Yeah, so to take those in order, yes, he is certainly painting himself as the true blue candidate. I spoke to him on Monday and was at an event of his Monday night, and he said, quite clearly that he thinks Peter MacKay is a red Tory. He will turn the party into the Liberal Party light, is what Erin O'Toole said. And he thinks that the Conservative Party should pick him as a conservative, principled conservative who thinks that Conservatives can win by having conservative ideas on everything from healthcare to defense, foreign policy, all these sorts of things. So yes, that is how he is casting this campaign, or casting his candidacy, I should say. And yes, on Monday night in Calgary, he was at the Ranchman's Club, which exclusive, luxurious kind of place. They don't normally let someone like me in there, but I put on a tie and down I went. And he gave about a 10-minute speech, sort of, you get the sort of the feel for the shape of what his talking points are going to be about his campaign. And he answered a bunch of questions from the audience, and I thought comported himself quite well in response to those questions. And lastly, the French. So he does say he's bilingual. He said on Monday that he speaks like a soldier, not a diplomat. So he does have quite a strong accent, English accent, Anglophone accent, but apparently is pretty good on his feet in French. And now, of course, Peter MacKay's French abilities have been something of a controversy this week. There were some headlines in Quebec newspapers sort of taking issue with his abilities there. So that's Erin O'Toole insofar as we know about him.
But I'm thinking the Conservatives would go more after the star candidate, former Harper cabinet minister MacKay. I mean, he was Justice Minister, Foreign Affairs Minister. I think he was Finance Minister, like a jack of all trades, right? So wouldn't they go after a bigger star candidate? Or maybe that's the old school way of thinking. People are thinking, you know what, we had the Harper years, it's time to move on.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's an interesting moment for them to be confronting this question, because the way I see the last 5 years of the Conservative Party is they did sort of fail to reinvent themselves after Stephen Harper left. I mean, Erin O'Toole spoke a lot about the Stephen Harper years. There's this real nostalgia for Stephen Harper. And you saw it in Andrew Scheer's campaign platform with many ideas from the Harper years. You had tax credits and things like that. So, I think that's a great question. Is Peter MacKay, who was a Harper guy, is he reinventing the party in some ways? Does he have the charisma to take on Justin Trudeau? Or do you have a guy like Erin O'Toole, who's also been around for a long time, but is maybe a little more like Andrew Scheer in the sense that he's not as flashy of a candidate? I'm not sure what the right answer is to that question, but I think that's probably going to be part of what this party is grappling with. And Erin O'Toole said, this is about the future identity of the Conservative Party. That's what this race is about. And I think that's probably true, because I don't know if the party successfully remade themselves after Stephen Harper retired.
Well, we'll see how it all shakes down. Tyler, you said this was kind of a rough week for our province's Justice Minister, Doug Schweitzer. The Elections Commissioner is reviewing a donation he received from Steve Allen. Now, that's the guy heading the inquiry into foreign funding. He also campaigned for Schweitzer during the UCP leadership.
Yeah, as you say, there have been a couple controversies that have involved Doug Schweitzer and Steve Allen. So Steve Allen had campaigned for Schweitzer, and then Schweitzer sort of turned around and appointed him to head this commission, which there, some eyebrows were raised there, but it was sort of explained away. Forensic accountant, knows his business, what have you. And then Steve Allen went and sole sourced a contract to Denton's, which was the law firm that Schweitzer worked at, and I believe the law firm that a relation of Steve Allen's worked for. Now, this week what we've seen is there was an event that was held back in sort of the early days when Schweitzer decided he was going to get into politics. And Steve Allen put up some money and helped host that event, and there was no real record of this. And it sort of came out this week. So, the ethics commissioner is looking into this, and we won't necessarily know what the outcome of this is for some time, but it just sort of adds to this little drip, drip, drip of controversy that Schweitzer is facing, and add to the maybe short list of controversies the government's facing as well. And in some ways this is lucky timing, I would say, for Schweitzer, because the legislature isn't sitting right now, so you don't have every day Rachel Notley or someone standing up and pounding away on this issue in front of cameras and microphones. So bit of a lucky break there maybe, but I don't doubt that this will continue to be an issue once the legislature resumes in a few weeks here.
Some changes are coming to the Alberta Seniors Drug Benefit Program on March 1st, and people are receiving their letters in the mail. What will some of the changes look like?
Yeah. So thankfully, the changes aren't super significant. What we are going to see is that if you are under 65 years of age, you will be taken off this seniors drug plan. The idea being that a seniors drug plan is for seniors. If you're not 65, you're not a senior. But what this doesn't do is suddenly leave people wholly in the lurch without a drug program. The sole sort of change that people are going to notice is that there is a monthly premium that is paid to go into an alternative plan. And it's about $65 a month, something to that effect. And other drugs, chemotherapy drugs, things like that, those are still covered under other government programs. So there was a little bit of sort of erroneous controversy this week that suggested there were going to be, really significant drugs that suddenly were without coverage. That doesn't seem to be the case, but it will be a little bit of change and perhaps a little bit of paperwork for Albertans. And it comes alongside some other changes that we're seeing with payments for the AISH program, which is for people with severe disabilities in the province. So just sort of it's some of these sort of administrative changes that were in the platform but are now sort of coming out, and some people being caught unawares, some people not. It's just sort of part of the UCP's proposed agenda, legislated agenda. That's just now they're coming into force, and people are going to have to sort of deal with those things as they come along.
The province has come out with new curriculum details. How is it looking so far?
Well, it was quite an interesting press conference on Wednesday. So basically, there was this big look at the NDP program, and so what we have now is sort of a little roadmap, 20 odd recommendations for moving forward, a ministerial note on this. And so what's going to happen for the next few weeks, I think until February 24th, is Albertans can go online, take a survey, and give their feedback on the curriculum. Now, on Wednesday, the details were pretty vague, to be honest. Reporters were asking Adriana LaGrange, the education minister, for specifics on some of this stuff, and then she said, "You're putting the cart before the horse. We don't know. The process is ongoing." The really interesting thing about it at this point is they actually said some nice things about the NDP curriculum, and so the NDP came out with sort of a triumphant press release on Wednesday afternoon saying UCP endorses NDP education curriculum, which is, a bit of grandstanding, but it was a little bit odd in that sense. So the focus of this curriculum is going to be on literacy and numeracy, getting away from things like discovery learning that conservatives in the province have been sort of upset about for a considerable amount of time. And there's a whole pile of other little things in these recommendations that are, I think, going to be explored in the coming days. The one that just jumped out at me was that one of the recommendations is to break out a separate world history class in high school from the social studies program, suggesting that, a knowledge of international history is beneficial in, the world of tomorrow. And as someone who spent 4 years getting a history degree, I can't disagree with that. So, we will see how things go through the consultation, what this ends up in the curriculum rewrite. But, things are underway.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried that discovery math? That's a
Gosh,
nightmare.
I'm so bad at math, Hal, it might actually help me.
Pull out the old calculator, right?
Yeah, exactly. Teachers always said you wouldn't have a calculator with you always, and you know what? Believe it or not, right here.
Tyler, Premier Kenney is putting pressure on the Trudeau government on the TECK oil sands mine near Fort McMurray. Cabinet is to decide whether or not the initiative will move ahead. Now, we're talking about a $21 billion project that could produce about 260,000 barrels per day. What's the holdup?
Yeah, just a massive project, massive amounts of money, awful lot of oil coming out. So it's not entirely clear, I would say, what the holdup is. The new environment minister was sort of saying that cabinet has the power to defer this decision, to make this decision, to reject it, to approve it, whatever. And it seems to be part of this involves sort of looking at the government of Alberta's emissions plan. You'll recall the TIER plan that was approved last year. So it could sort of just be that they are trying to negotiate, I think, at the federal level, their climate change commitments, their emissions reductions commitments, with approving this sort of mega project up in the oil sands. So Jason Kenney, of course, not super happy about this, saying the project has gone through all of its approvals over the years, all of its consultations. Should be time to go ahead. This should be a no-brainer. And of course, the federal government being, slightly intransigent on it, as they have been for a while. It seems unlikely to me, perhaps, that we'll see outright cancellation of this. But, if we look at TMX and these other projects that have been underway for a while here, a delay would be very much normal, I think.
The Fair Deal panel wrapped up earlier this week in Airdrie. That means by the end of March, it'll have recommendations to the government about which policies it wants to implement.
Yes, indeed. So, gosh, it feels like we talk every time we do this about all the panel this, panel that consultation. There's all these, they have a lot of balls in the air right now. And yes, so this was the one that was announced sort of late-ish last year that was looking at getting a better deal within Confederation. These are things like equalization, having a provincial police force, a provincial pension plan, what have you. Some of those fair deal panels have sort of devolved into separatist complaining. Others have not. There have been, it seems, in all of them, some people who've expressed, considerable support for staying in Canada and things like that. So, what they're going to report back to the government on their findings from these panels, and the government's going to decide sort of whether or not they want to pursue any of them. And some of the ones that they could pursue, they would be putting to a referendum. So the big one there probably is the Alberta pension plan. If we decide to withdraw from if the government thinks we should withdraw from the CPP and create our new pension plan, that will go to a referendum. So Albertans will be able to make a decision on that. So the consultations are wrapping up. The report is coming. Certainly, this saga is nowhere near finished. And to take it back to what I was talking about at the beginning with Aaron O'Toole, who said that he chatted with Jason Kenney about some of this stuff, and one of the people in the audience actually said, "Well, Aaron, you chatted with Jason Kenney, and he's doing all these things to sort of push back against the federal government. How do you navigate that? How would you navigate that as a conservative leader?" And he basically said, "Well, there's a lot of legitimate grievances, but in his view, they're mostly the fault of the Trudeau Liberals. So you get rid of the Liberals, you maybe sort of get rid of some of these problems and eliminate the need to do anything too drastic." So, I think that, as we talked about before the election, this is the other issue at hand, which is how long is the Trudeau government going to be around, and will the province want to push forward quickly on any of these things if there's a possible change in government in a few years?
The telephone budget town halls have wrapped up. Tyler, Albertans can continue to submit comments online until February 7th. Now, what's the government hoping to achieve with these telephone town halls?
Yeah, so they just want to know what Albertans' priorities are for the budget. So obviously we had a budget sort of last year that was not a full budget, and so we are going to be getting a budget sooner or later. And the government, with its passion for consultation, wants to know what Albertans think their priorities ought to be, and what they would like to see. So that's almost all there is to it. And I guess part of what we'll have to see from those consultations is to what extent either the NDP is able to mobilize opposition, or that it'll be a good way to sort of take the temperature on how Albertans are feeling about some of the cutbacks and belt tightening that the UCP is proposing.
Angus Reid has some TMX polling out this week. There's actually some opposition to the pipeline growing, even though progress is finally being made on construction. Is the opposition coming from Alberta?
No, it isn't. In fact, the people in favor of the pipeline that support is sort of solidifying across the prairies. So we're seeing more of that in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Alberta. Where we are seeing an increase in opposition is in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, which I wouldn't say is totally surprising. So what we're seeing is about 55% support for the project, so a slim majority. We are seeing an increase in opposition of about 11%. And just casting around in my mind for the last number. Oh, yes. And then we've got about an even split, sort of mid-30s on an even split on how the Trudeau government is handling the energy file and pipeline access. So kind of interesting that, just as we're seeing, as you said, this progress, we're now seeing a little bit of opposition to it. This is obviously going to be a political issue, I think, that exists for a long time.
I have a lot of family in the oil and gas industry and the energy sector. Finally, happy to see shovels in the ground.
Absolutely.
The Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining me from Edmonton.
Thanks so much, Hal.